They said I didn't belong in their rich family. Now I run their business. Meeting your future in-laws should be a pleasant experience, right? Yeah, that's what I thought too. I stepped into the restaurant and immediately felt like I was walking onto the set of a movie I wasn't cast in. The chandeliers sparkled. The linen on the tables looked like it had been ironed by someone with way too much free time, and the cheapest glass of wine cost more than an entire meal at Chick-fil-A. The kind of place where the valet looks at your car before deciding whether to be nice to you. Classic old money territory. My son Ethan had been going on and on about his girlfriend, Hannah Sinclair, for months. Ever since my wife passed when Ethan was 10, it had just been the two of us. Balancing single fatherhood and running a business wasn't easy, but I made sure he never lacked for anything. And now, here he was grown, successful, completely smitten with a smart, beautiful woman from an old money family. Whatever that was supposed to mean. I'd spent my life earning every dollar I had, so the idea of inherited wealth always felt different. When he invited me to finally meet her parents, Gran and Evelyn Sinclair, I figured why not. Maybe we'd have a nice dinner, swap a few pleasantries, and welcome a new family into ours. Except the second I sat down, it became painfully obvious these people had zero interest in acknowledging my existence. Grant Sinclair, the type of guy who probably had a portrait of himself hanging in his office, barely looked at me. Evelyn, she swirled her wine, staring at the glass like she was trying to decode some hidden message in it. They greeted Ethan with polite warmth, showered Hannah with affection, and then me? Nothing. I might as well have been the guy refilling their water. All right, let's see how this plays out. The conversation turned to business, because of course it did. Grant clearly loved an audience, and tonight, he was the star of his own show. He rambled on about small people who lacked vision, how the economy was for those who knew how to play the game, and how he had turned Sinclair Group into an empire. He spoke about money like it was a divine right, as if hard work had nothing to do with it. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. I just listened. Guys like Grant always talk too much. And if you let them, they'll tell you everything you need to know, between bites of his dry-aged steak. Because, of course, he ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. He leaned in, smirking, and launched into a tale about how he had saved Sinclair Group from the brink of collapse. In his version, he was the hero, the mastermind who navigated a sinking ship back to success. That's when it clicked. I already owned Sinclair Group. Not officially, not yet. But for months, my company had been quietly acquiring stakes through subsidiaries. The business was bleeding cash, desperate for a lifeline, and I had been buying it up piece by piece, waiting for the right moment to take full control. Grant had no idea the man sitting across from him controlled the fate of his so-called empire. I picked up my glass, took a slow sip, and let a smirk creep onto my face. Oh, this dinner just got a whole lot more interesting. Ethan was thrilled about the wedding. I was thrilled for him. But the moment I even suggested covering part of the costs, the Sinclairs shut it down. It's a family event, Grant had said with a patronizing chuckle. We'll take care of everything. All right. No big deal, right? They wanted to handle it fine. But the more details I learned, the more I realized something. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. The first red flag? The invitations. Mine wasn't even personalized. It read, Mr. Thompson plus guest, no first name, no acknowledgement of my relationship to the groom. Just a generic, borderline afterthought invitation. The kind you send to acquaintances or distant relatives you hope won't actually show up. The kicker? The seating arrangement. Instead of sitting near Ethan, I was placed at a table in the back of the reception hall, stuck with distant relatives and plus ones who had no idea who the bride and groom even were. My son was getting married, and I was being treated like an extra at his own wedding. Then came the pre-wedding events. Every major celebration, engagement party, rehearsal dinner, even a private brunch for close family, somehow didn't include me. I found out through social media. Pictures of Grant making a toast, Evelyn beaming like a queen overseeing her court, Ethan and Hannah surrounded by their real family. I wasn't even an afterthought. I was invisible. It got worse. The wedding had a formal luxury dress code, whatever that meant, a subtle way of telling me my usual tailored suit wasn't good enough for their standards. Every detail screamed exclusivity, an unspoken reminder that I was an outsider. I even overheard one of Evelyn's friends joke that I might stick out at the reception. I wasn't sure if she meant my suit or the fact that I wasn't one of them. But Evelyn, she didn't do subtle. We were at the final wedding rehearsal when she pulled me aside. Her expression was polite, but her tone carried an edge. She told me, in no uncertain terms, that I should know my place and not expect to be a major part of Ethan's life after the wedding. They had plans, a new life, new traditions. I wouldn't fit in. I looked at her, absorbing every word. She actually thought she could push me out of my own son's life, like I was some temporary inconvenience. The wedding venue was everything you'd expect from a Sinclair event. High ceilings, golden chandeliers, and tables so polished you could see your reflection. The guests walked around in designer tuxedos, whispering about stock portfolios and art collections. And then there was me, in my old faithful Brooks Brothers suit. It had been with me through business deals, board meetings, even Ethan's graduation. It wasn't flashy, but it got the job done. Apparently, that wasn't enough for the Sinclairs. They sat me so far back, I could have been in the parking lot. The seating chart read like a social hierarchy manual, and I was firmly at the bottom. My assigned table was practically in another zip code, surrounded by distant relatives, awkward plus ones, and some guy who, based on the confused look on his face, might have just wandered in off the street. I barely had a view of the main table. Meanwhile, Grant and Evelyn sat front and center like royalty, basking in the glow of their perfect Sinclair event. I noticed the looks the moment I stepped in. Quick glances, whispered comments. One guest actually smirked, nodding toward my suit like I had just wandered in from a thrift store. I shrugged it off until I got to the bar. Everyone else was sipping champagne from crystal flutes, clinking glasses with the kind of forced laughter that only comes from people who think they're important. When I asked for a drink, the bartender hesitated, glanced toward the wedding planner, then handed me a plastic cup, a flimsy red Solo cup, like I was at some backyard barbecue instead of my own son's wedding. I turned it in my hand, debating whether to make a scene, but before I could, a familiar voice cut through the chatter. Bradley Sinclair, Hannah's uncle, a man with too much cologne and even more opinions. He clapped me on the back, laughing as he leaned in just a little too close. "You must be relieved," he said. "Ethan's finally going to be part of a real family." I stared at him, trying to decide if he had actually just said that out loud. His grin told me he had. The guy reeked of entitlement and expensive bourbon, and he was just waiting for a reaction. It wasn't just an insult. It was a message, a reminder that, in their eyes, I didn't belong here. I was a footnote in my own son's story. I glanced across the room and caught Hannah watching us. Her smile had faded, her posture stiff. She had heard it, and for the first time since this whole circus started, I saw something different in her expression, realization. Like she was finally seeing her family the way I had been seeing them all along. She turned red, her hands tightening around her bouquet. Her eyes flicked between Bradley, me, and the picture-perfect Sinclair world she was about to step into. Oh, this wedding just got a whole lot more interesting. I let them think they won. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The morning after the wedding, I checked my email and saw a message from Grant Sinclair. Subject line, "A beautiful night to remember." I already knew what this was before I even opened it. Sure enough, attached were photos from the wedding. Smiling guests, elegant decorations, and the happy couple beaming under twinkling lights. I scrolled through, knowing exactly what I wouldn't find me. I wasn't in a single shot. Well, almost. One picture showed the back of my head in the far corner, slightly out of focus, like I had accidentally wandered into the frame. The caption below it read, "Money isn't everything, but, well, sometimes it helps." I took a deep breath, staring at the screen. I had given these people every chance. I had let them dismiss me, sideline me, humiliate me at my own son's wedding. And now, they were rubbing it in. Fine, if they wanted to play games, I'd show them how it was done. I grabbed my phone and made a few calls. Nothing drastic, just setting things in motion. A little push here, a quiet conversation there. I wasn't rushing. Timing was everything. Let them bask in their little victory lap while the ground beneath them crumbled. By noon, I was sitting in my office, going through the numbers one last time. Every single thread of Sinclair Group's so-called empire was unraveling. They just hadn't noticed yet. It was almost impressive how oblivious they were. The expensive galas, the country club memberships, the smug confidence in their old money status. It was all built on a foundation of wishful thinking. And behind the scenes, I had been pulling the strings, tightening the financial noose they didn't even realize was around their necks. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. Black, no sugar, no cream, just like I liked it. The numbers on the screen didn't lie. Sinclair Group was in free fall, and they were too busy congratulating themselves to notice the ground rushing up to meet them. I glanced at my watch. Give it another 24 hours. Maybe 48. Then I'd make my move. They had no idea. When I stepped into the boardroom, they barely reacted. For a moment, I could tell they didn't even recognize me. Then the panic set in. The boardroom at Sinclair Group was just as I remembered. Polished mahogany table, overpriced artwork on the walls, and an atmosphere thick with arrogance. The kind of place where people convinced themselves they were untouchable. The coffee, probably imported, served in dainty porcelain cups no one actually liked but drank from to look sophisticated. When I stepped inside, the room barely reacted. Grant Sinclair was lounging in his absurdly expensive leather chair, a custom-made piece worth more than some of his employees made in a year. He barely glanced at me before scoffing. "Sir, I think you're in the wrong meeting." I almost laughed. The man had no idea. I pulled out my chair, sat down like I belonged, because I did, and set my folder on the table. A few of the executives exchanged nervous glances. They weren't sure why I was here, but something in my expression must have told them this wasn't a friendly visit. "Let's get to it," I said, flipping open the documents. "I assume you all got last quarter's financials." Silence. Grant smirked, leaning back, clearly amused. "We're handling it," he muttered, waving a dismissive hand. "These things fluctuate." Fluctuate? I tilted my head, pretending to consider that. Interesting word for a company circling the drain. Payroll delays, unpaid suppliers, dwindling investor confidence. Sounds less like a fluctuation and more like a free fall. The smirk faded. Evelyn, still glued to her phone, finally looked up, sensing something was off. I slid another document across the table. For those of you who haven't been paying attention, which seems to be most of you, Sinclair Group has been running on fumes for months. And as of last week, the board approved a full transfer of ownership. Grant's fingers twitched. What exactly does that mean? I leaned back, enjoying this moment. It means that as of this morning, I'm your boss. The silence was deafening. Faces paled, chairs shifted. Someone actually dropped their pen. One executive looked like he was contemplating an early retirement, effective immediately. I let it sink in before continuing. Let's go over some numbers, shall we? Wages have been stagnant for years, while executive bonuses mysteriously ballooned. Employee retention is a joke. Turns out, people don't enjoy working for a company that treats them like disposable parts. And let's not forget the creative bookkeeping that's kept this place barely limping along. Grant opened his mouth, but I cut him off. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to fix the mess you've made. And trust me, gentlemen, changes are coming. I watched as the reality of their situation hit them. The Sinclair dynasty had just crumbled, and they hadn't even seen it coming. The moment reality set in, the Sinclairs scrambled. Grant straightened his tie, putting on his best corporate poker face, but I could see the panic in his eyes. The rest of the boardroom sat frozen, waiting for him to pull some magic trick out of his sleeve. There wasn't one. Then came the pivot. Grant leaned forward, steepling his fingers like a man trying to sell a used car. No point dwelling on the past, his tone dripping with forced optimism. What's done is done. We should focus on the future. Together. The way he said together almost made me laugh. Just yesterday, I was invisible to them. Now, suddenly, I was a key player. And then there was Evelyn. She finally lifted her eyes from her phone and, for the first time, gave me her full attention. Gone was the cold indifference. Instead, a carefully rehearsed smile stretched across her face. "You should come for dinner sometime," she offered smoothly, like we were old friends reconnecting over a bottle of overpriced wine. It was almost impressive how fast they could flip the switch. I let the silence hang, enjoying the discomfort spreading across the room. Then I leaned back and folded my arms. "Here's what's going to happen." Grant's smirk faltered. The room tensed. "I'm not firing anyone yet, but things are changing. Every single executive in this company will undergo a performance review. No more blank checks for incompetence. No more golden parachutes for failures. You either prove your worth or pack up your office." A few of them visibly swallowed. Grant shifted in his overpriced chair, the one that probably cost more than some employees' annual salaries. "That seems fair." I cut in. "I agree. And don't worry, it's all by the book. Just business." Evelyn's fake smile twitched. She knew exactly what that meant. No lawsuits, no PR disasters, just cold, calculated restructuring. The Sinclair dynasty wasn't just under new management. It was under an entirely different set of rules. I stood up, collecting my documents. "We start Monday. Make sure your resumes are up to date." As I walked out, I caught Grant gripping the edge of the table a little too hard. Desperate people will do anything to save themselves. The fun part? Watching them scramble. After the chaos in the boardroom, I figured the Sinclairs would retreat, regroup, and come back with some desperate last-ditch effort to keep their empire intact. What I didn't expect was an invitation, handwritten no less, inviting me to their home for a casual dinner. No private chefs, no 5-course meal, just a simple evening. Right? Because we were all best friends now. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not seared filet mignon, not imported truffle risotto. No, this was pizza, takeout, greasy, cheesy. Probably ordered from whatever local place had the best online reviews. I glanced at the box. Yep, a basic chain spot. If I didn't know better, I'd say they were trying a little too hard to seem normal. Grant greeted me like an old buddy, leading me to the dining room where Evelyn was already setting out paper plates. Paper, as if trying to prove they weren't snobs by going full college dorm mode. I almost laughed. The silverware? Plastic. The napkins? Store brand. It was like watching a couple of actors trying too hard to play middle class. The conversation started light, too light. Weather, sports, some forced chuckles over how it's good to take a step back sometimes. Evelyn mentioned how refreshing it was to keep things simple, like she hadn't been drinking champagne out of a crystal flute the night before. Grant, meanwhile, made some half-hearted comments about how pizza nights were underrated. I let them dance around the real reason I was here. Then Grant cleared his throat, put down his slice, and finally got to the point. "Let's be honest," he started. "We've had our differences." I took a sip of my drink, waiting. No need to rush this. Let them squirm a little. Evelyn leaned in. "We understand change is necessary. We're ready to adapt." Ah, there it was. I set my drink down. That's good to hear. Because here's the deal. I'm not running this company like a family trust fund. If you want to stay in, you work for it. No more cushy executive roles, no more unchecked spending. Every decision, every dollar, accountable. Think of it as merit-based survival. Silence. Grant forced a smile, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Evelyn nodded slowly, gripping her napkin a little too tightly. Her fingers curled around it like she was holding on to something more than just fabric, like she was holding on to the last bit of control she thought she had. I leaned back. So, what do you think? They didn't answer right away, but I already knew this was their only option, and for the first time, they knew it too. A month later, Sinclair Group looked nothing like the company it once was. The empty executive offices weren't so empty anymore, now filled with people who actually knew what they were doing. The pointless boardroom meetings were replaced with ones that mattered. And the employees? They actually look happy. No more unpaid overtime. No more nonsense about loyalty being more important than fair pay. Just a company that finally started working like it should have all along. A few old-timers grumbled at first, but once they saw their paychecks growing instead of the CEO's bank account, the complaints vanished. Evelyn had taken the changes in stride, or at least, she acted like she did. She no longer strutted into the office in head-to-toe Prada. These days, she blended in, opting for understated professional wear, a stark contrast to the woman who once wore status like a second skin. She still had that sharp, calculating look in her eyes, but now, at least, she had the sense to keep it in check. Grant, he took his exit package and disappeared, probably licking his wounds in some golf resort, sipping overpriced cocktails, and complaining about how the old ways were better. I didn't lose any sleep over it. Some people weren't meant to adapt. As for Ethan and Hannah, they finally moved out of the Sinclair estate and got a place of their own. No more whispered manipulations, no more pressure to conform. Just two people trying to build a life without the weight of their families hanging over them. I visited them once, and for the first time, Ethan actually looked relaxed, like he wasn't waiting for someone to pull the rug out from under him. One afternoon, I found myself in my garage, staring at my old Porsche. It had been sitting there for years, gathering dust, waiting for a day that never seemed to come. Until now. I popped the hood, checked the engine, and ran my hand over the leather seats. The thing was still in great shape. It just needed someone to take it out and actually enjoy it. Ethan walked in, raising an eyebrow at me as I wiped down the hood. Didn't think you'd ever take this thing out again. I tossed him the keys, watching as his face lit up with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Time to enjoy life, kid. For the first time in a long time, I meant it.